Okay, I want to dive right into the topic of Bitcoin banking, and I think the logical place to start is one of the first references I ever saw to the topic of Bitcoin banking, and this came from Hal Finney in a Bitcoin
Yeah,
Talk forum post in 2010. And I want to just read off the post. It's a little bit long, but I'm going to read it off for you, and then maybe we can get into
sure.
some of the similarities and differences between Hal's vision for Bitcoin banking and your vision now about a decade later. So Hal says, actually, there's a very good reason for Bitcoin-backed banks to exist, issuing their own digital cash currency redeemable for Bitcoins. Bitcoin itself cannot scale to have every single financial transaction in the world to be broadcast to everyone and included in a blockchain. There needs to be a secondary level of payment systems which is lighter weight and more efficient. Likewise, the time needed for Bitcoin transactions to finalize will be impractical for medium to large value purchases. And he says Bitcoin-backed banks will solve these problems. They can work like banks did before the nationalization of currency. Different banks can have different policies, some more aggressive, some more conservative. Some would be fractional reserves, while others may be 100% Bitcoin backed. Interest rates may vary. Cash from some banks may trade at a discount to that from others. And he goes on to say George Selgin has worked out the theory of competitive free banking in detail, and he argues that such a system would be stable, inflation resistant, self regulating. And finally, Hal says, I believe this will be the ultimate fate of Bitcoin, to be the high powered money that serves as a reserve currency for banks that issue their own digital cash. Most Bitcoin transactions will occur between banks to settle net transfers. Bitcoin transactions by private individuals will be as rare as, well, Bitcoin-based purchases are today. So that was Hal's kind of, that was his
Yeah.
post he made about a decade ago.
We're
Um,
not worthy. We're not worthy, right? Hal is probably Satoshi. So yeah.
what do you think of, looking back now at that, and having followed the space for the last decade, what are your thoughts on what in that is true today? What part of that you think is going to be true into the future? And are there any differences? Any things that Hal kind of believe would come true and are not
Yeah.
going to come true, or you don't think have come true?
Amazingly prescient by Hal, he did essentially lay out the need for the Lightning Network, which is the lightweight payments on top of Bitcoin, and how Bitcoin itself will be a large value payment transfer network. And if you think back to when he wrote that, that wasn't what Bitcoin was at all. It was just right. It was back then, it was, you got your Bitcoin through localbitcoins.com. And maybe if you were lucky, you happened to be in, one of the few places where there was a Bitcoin ATM. And that's how you got Bitcoins. There, Gox really hadn't taken off at that point. And so it was incredibly prescient for him to have predicted all of that. That quote, I think it's twisted a lot by those who are interested in the free banking debate versus the Rothbard debate. But I would point out that he acknowledged that those two systems could potentially coexist. That's where I would get into some disagreement with him. But I think there's more right in his statement than there is wrong. And he laid out exactly where we're headed, which is Bitcoin becomes the high value transfer system because block space is designed to be scarce. And this gets really into the big blockers debate. I went to the first Scaling Bitcoin conference in Montreal in 2014. I kept my head down because, keep in mind, back then I wasn't telling the world that I was from Morgan Stanley for fear of getting fired. And but yet I was so interested in this whole question, and I was quiet throughout the debate, but it was very much on the small blockers side. You have to keep the base layer decentralized. You have to keep it so that it's not possible for anyone to take it over and change the monetary policy. I mean, that's one of the debates with Ethereum, is that from the very beginning, with that initial Ethereum hack, that basically changing the consensus mechanism, the hard forks in these systems have to be impossible. Otherwise, someone is going to step in and change the monetary policy. in that case, in the Ethereum case, it was to roll back for that hack of the very first DAO. I've always thought Ethereum and Bitcoin are quite frankly very different systems with very different use cases. We can come back and talk about that in a bit, but especially for Bitcoin, it's critical that monetary policy never be altered. And so I'm so glad that in the block size wars, that the users of Bitcoin, those who control the network, who really showed who control the network. It's not the miners, it's not the large payment processors or the exchanges. It's regular plebes. It's just regular folks. It's the node operators. That UASF period was such a fascinating time. And for those who are not familiar with what I'm talking about, there's a terrific book called The Block Size War. And I would encourage you to read that. It actually talks about that conference in Montreal in 2014 that I attended. And the whole idea was to make Bitcoin anti-fragile. The t-shirt from that conference says, "I am anti-fragility." And it's fun to wear that t-shirt around. And although, frankly, it's a collector's item, so I don't wear it very much. But it is fun to have people ask you, what does that mean? And it's not that I'm against fragility. It's that I'm for building Bitcoin to be an anti-fragile system. And that's exactly what it has become. And it's just a wonderful thing. But back to the point about how he understood that this was not designed for high volume payments. There isn't ever going to be high velocity on the Bitcoin blockchain, and you don't want there to be. And so block space is going to be, by definition, very expensive, which means that it is going to be usable by large payments. Now, all that said, if you want to, one of the great things about Bitcoin is that anybody can join the network. Like you said, just, hook up a Raspberry Pi. And, it takes about $100 worth of hardware in a couple of hours for anyone in the world with an internet connection to join the network. And anyone can become a part of this network. You don't have to go ask for permission from a financial institution to do so. And that's enormously empowering. And the fact that any one of us could move value on the base layer blockchain, even if it's expensive to do so, that is of crucial importance. Nick Szabo, who is one of the other people who is still alive, who could be Satoshi, he made an incredible speech that I continually come back to at Bitcoin 2021, where he said, liquidity is a nice to have, but not a must have. You need to be able to transact in Bitcoin, but you don't need to be able to do it with liquidity. All this daily liquidity that everybody in the trading world was trying to create so that we have really tight bid offer spreads and really low execution cost. No, that is, I'm opposed to that philosophy. Those are the big blockers who frankly should not be using base layer Bitcoin. Base layer Bitcoin is designed to do exactly what it's doing today, which is be expensive. And to Nick's point, because we all have access to it, even if it costs us money to move value on the Bitcoin blockchain, that's all we need. That gives us the freedom. We don't want the big blockers and the tight bid offer spreaders to come in and corrupt it, which is frankly what several of the short time preference folks who are now going bankrupt did in the last bull market. And I say good riddance to all of them. It's those of us who are building something durable, something long-term. We have very long-term horizons in what we're doing because we really get the ethos of Bitcoin. And it's not about tight bid offer spreads. It's about being able to transact at all on the base layer itself, even if that is expensive.